The mountains do not care about your maps or your confidence. They sit there, ancient and indifferent, waiting for the one moment you stop paying attention. For the 1 second you decide to trust your own senses over the reality of the stone and the pine. Up in the San Gorgonio Wilderness, the air has a way of thinning out until it feels like you are breathing cold glass. It is a place of jagged granite and deceptive shadows, where the wind whispers things that your brain tries very hard to ignore. But the mountain knows you can hear it. In 1991, a young soul stepped into those woods, surrounded by people who were supposed to be watching. It was a simple hike, a path traveled 1,000 times before by boots, just like his. Yet, within the span of a few heartbeats, the world simply folded in on itself, and he was gone. The group moved with a rhythmic, heavy pace, the sound of their breath mingling with the dry crunch of the shale beneath them. They were heading toward the summit, a line of human beings tethered together by nothing more than sight and sound. And in the wilderness, that is a very thin thread indeed. The hiker felt the weight of his pack pressing into his shoulders, a dull ache that served as his only anchor to the physical world. He was lagging behind, just a dozen yards or so. But in these mountains, a dozen yards might as well be a dozen miles. If the terrain decides it wants to hide you, the sun was a pale, sickly disk hanging over the peaks, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move faster than the light should allow. He wiped the sweat from his eyes, blinking against the glare. And when he looked up again, the backs of his companions had flickered out of existence behind a stand of ancient, twisted trees. He did not panic at first, because panic is a luxury the mind saves for later. He simply quickened his pace, expecting to see the bright colors of their jackets around the next bend. But there was only the gray spine of the mountain and the suffocating silence of the high altitude. He called out a name, his voice sounding thin and brittle in the vast expanse of the San Gorgonio. The sound did not echo, it was swallowed instantly, as if the very air were made of heavy velvet that muffled his plea. The mountain was already beginning to digest him. The trail beneath his feet felt different now. The dirt a little too loose, the rocks a little too sharp. He turned back to see where he had come from, but the path had vanished into a chaotic sprawl of boulders and fallen timber. It was as if the landscape had rearranged itself the moment he turned his head. This is the hallmark of the missing 411 phenomena. That sudden and impossible isolation in an area that should be familiar. You are there one moment, a part of the human world, and the next, you have stepped through a door that only opens one way. He kept moving, driven by a primal instinct to find higher ground. But the higher he went, the more the world seemed to betray him. The trees here were stunted and skeletal, their branches reaching out, like reaching fingers toward the darkening sky. And the wind began to pick up, carrying a scent of something old and metallic. He checked his watch, the hands ticking away the seconds of his life. But the time felt wrong. He had been walking for what felt like hours. Yet the sun seemed frozen in its descent, as if the mountain had suspended time to toy with its new guest. The cold began to seep through his olive-green jacket, a deep, penetrating chill that no amount of movement could ward off. It wasn't just the temperature of the air, it was the cold of the earth itself, rising up through the soles of his boots, pulling at him, inviting him to lie down and become part of the stone. He found a small clearing and decided to wait. Remembering the training that told him to stay put, he sat on a flat rock, his breath coming in ragged white plumes that hung in the air like ghosts. And that was when he heard the first sound that wasn't the wind. It was a soft, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat coming from deep within the mountain itself. He pressed his hands to his ears, but the sound was inside his head, a low-frequency vibration that made his teeth shake and his skin crawl with 1,000 invisible needles. He looked toward the tree line, his eyes straining against the gathering gloom. He thought he saw a figure standing between two pines, a tall, elongated shape that didn't move or breathe. It just stood there, a darker shadow against the dark, watching the life drain out of him. He stood up, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He backed away from the shape, his boots slipping on the scree, and the mountain shifted again. the slope tilting at an impossible angle that sent him tumbling into the brush. When he stopped sliding, he was in a ravine he didn't recognize, a deep gash in the earth that smelled of damp rot and ancient copper. He scrambled to his feet, his hands raw and bleeding from the sharp rocks. But he couldn't feel the pain anymore. Night finally fell, and with it came a darkness so absolute it felt physical. He could not see his own hand in front of his face, yet he could feel the presence of the mountain all around him. A massive, breathing entity that was slowly closing its maw. He reached into his pack and pulled out his camera, the small plastic device feeling like a holy relic in his trembling hands. He didn't know why he took it out, only that he needed to document the horror of the void. Or perhaps he just wanted to see a flash of light, even for a millisecond. The first flash illuminated the ravine, revealing jagged walls of grey stone that seemed to be sweating a dark, oily liquid. There was nothing there, just the cold and the silence. The second flash caught the edge of something white and smooth, tucked into a crevice 10 feet away. He moved toward it, his legs feeling like leaden weights, and found a single candy wrapper, perfectly preserved, as if it had been placed there by a careful hand. He realized then that he wasn't lost in the traditional sense. He had been harvested, taken from the world of men, and placed into a space where the rules of physics were merely suggestions. He took another photo, aiming the lens at the spot where he felt the heaviest pressure of being watched. The flash flared, a brilliant burst of artificial day. And for a fraction of a second, he saw the shifting geometry of the trees, their trunks bending like rubber to hide what stood behind them. He began to run, or at least he tried to. But the ground beneath him felt like sponge. Every step took an eternity, and every breath was a battle against the suffocating weight of the mountain's breath. He was running in place in a nightmare made of granite. Back at the trailhead, the search was already beginning. Men with flashlights and dogs arrived, their voices calling out into the night, their beams cutting through the dark. But they were searching a mountain that existed in a different dimension than the one the hiker now inhabited. The dogs reached the point where the hiker had last been seen, and they stopped. They didn't bark. They didn't whine. They simply sat down and stared into the empty air, their hackles raised, refusing to move a single inch further. The searchers moved on, oblivious to the fact that they were walking right through the spaces where the hiker was screaming for help. In the world of the missing 411, you can be standing 5 feet from a rescue team and remain completely invisible. Separated by a veil as thin as a shadow and as thick as a tomb, days turned into a week, and the mountain began to give up small, cryptic clues. A wrapper here, a discarded piece of jerky there. Items that seemed to appear in areas that had already been cleared by expert trackers. It was as if the mountain were mocking them, dropping breadcrumbs to lead them in circles while it finished its work. They found his camera eventually, sitting on a high ridge that no 12-year-old could have reached without professional climbing gear, and no tracks led to or from the spot. The camera was cold, the plastic brittle from the high altitude. When the authorities developed the film, they didn't find photos of landscapes or friends. They found a descent into madness. The early shots were normal, just the mundane sights of a scouting trip. But the last 12 frames were different. They were captures of a reality that shouldn't exist. Blurred images of the night, streaks of light that looked like dancing embers. And finally, the shot that haunted the investigators for years. It was a close-up, out of focus and grainy, showing only a pair of eyes reflecting the flash. They weren't human eyes, but they weren't animal eyes either. They were wide, dark, and filled with a predatory intelligence that seemed to stare right through the lens and into the soul of whoever held the photo. And the hiker was nowhere to be seen in the frame. The search was eventually called off, as all searches are when the mountain refuses to yield its secrets. The family was left with a hole in their lives that no amount of grieving could fill. A silence that echoed with the unanswered questions of the San Gorgonio. How does a person vanish in a matter of seconds? Why do the dogs lose the scent at a specific, invisible line? These are the questions that define the missing 411 cases, and the answers are buried deep beneath the earth, in places where the light never reaches. Some say it is a matter of portals, weak spots in the fabric of our world, where the unwary can slip through. Others speak of ancient beings, the true owners of the wilderness, who take a toll from those who trespass on their peaks. But the mountain stays silent. The San Gorgonio Wilderness remains a popular destination for hikers and campers. They walk the same trails, breathe the same thin air, and look out over the same jagged horizon, never realizing how close they are to the edge of the abyss. You can feel it sometimes, when the wind dies down and the birds stop singing. That sudden, heavy stillness that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. That feeling that the tree you just passed wasn't there a moment ago. If you ever find yourself in those woods, and the trail seems to stretch out longer than it should, do not look back. Do not stop to catch your breath. And for the love of everything holy, do not follow the sound of a voice that sounds almost like someone you know. The mountain is always hungry, and it has all the time in the world to wait. It has been there since the beginning, and it will be there long after our cities have crumbled into dust. Just another grey peak in a world full of hungry shadows. We like to think we are the masters of this world, that our technology and our maps make us safe. But the missing 411 files tell a different story. A story of a reality that is far more fragile and far more dangerous than we dare to admit. Every year, people go into the wild and they do not come back. They leave behind a camera, a shoe, or nothing at all. And the world just keeps on turning as if they never existed. The hiker in 1991 was just one of many. A name on a list. A face on a poster that fades under the sun and the rain, until he is nothing more than a ghost story told around campfires. But the mountain remembers. It remembers the taste of his fear and the sound of his last breath. And it is waiting for the next person to fall behind. Just for a second. The wilderness is not your friend. It is a vast, beautiful, and terrifying enigma that we are only allowed to visit on its terms. And sometimes those terms include never leaving. Before we close this chapter of the missing 411, it is worth noting that the San Gorgonio incident is not an isolated event. In 1999, in the Poudre Canyon of Colorado, a young boy named Jared Atadero vanished in a nearly identical fashion, walking just a few feet ahead of his group before being swallowed by the forest. Like the case in San Gorgonio, searchers found almost nothing for years, despite the area being combed by thousands of volunteers. It was only much later that a single tooth and a scrap of clothing were found on a high, inaccessible cliff. A grim reminder that in the wild, the line between the hunter and the hunted is thinner than a blade of grass. Be careful out there. The mountains are watching, and they are very, very patient. The shadows are lengthening now, and the air is getting colder. It is time to leave the woods and head back to the safety of the lights, while you still can. But remember, even in the city, the silence of the mountain can still find you. It lives in the corners of your vision and the spaces between your heartbeats, waiting for you to forget that you are never truly alone. Good night, and stay on the trail, because once you step off, there is no telling where you might end up. The missing 411 is more than just a collection of stories. It is a warning. It is a reminder that there are places in this world where we do not belong, and things in the dark that are always hungry. So listen to the wind, and watch the trees. If they start to move when the air is still, run. Run until you see the lights of the town. And do not look back, because the mountain is already choosing its next guest. And it might just be you. The San Gorgonio Wilderness keeps its dead, and it keeps its secrets, and we are left with nothing but the photos, the whispers, and the cold, hard truth that some things are never meant to be found. The hiker from 1991 is still up there. In some sense, part of the stone, part of the wind, part of the mystery that we call the missing 411. His name is etched in the records, but his spirit is in the shadows, watching the new hikers, waiting for them to make the same mistake, waiting for the mountain to shift once more, and it will shift. It always does. That the silence is the last thing you hear, a weight that presses down on your chest until you can't breathe. And then, there is only the dark. Take care of yourselves, The world is a lot bigger and a lot stranger than they tell you in the brochures. And the missing 411 is just the tip of the iceberg. We will be back with more stories from the edge of the unknown. But for now, just keep your eyes open and your feet on the path. Because the mountain is always waiting. The end of one story is just the beginning of another. And in the San Gorgonio, the stories never truly end. They just wait for someone new to tell them. Keep the fire burning. Keep the lights on. And never, ever go into the woods alone. Because once you are gone, the only thing left will be the echo of your name in the wind. And even that will fade. Eventually, the mountain is patient. The mountain is hungry. And the mountain is always there. Goodbye for now. Stay safe. And stay aware. The wilderness is closer than you think, and the missing 411 is always watching, waiting for the next soul to slip through the cracks of reality. Into the belly of the beast. The San Gorgonio enigma remains unsolved. And perhaps it is better that way. Some things are not meant to be understood. They are only meant to be feared and respected. Good night. And remember, stay on the trail.